Video of Hamas conducting public executions is being released to send a message.
Hamas is still there. Hamas is strong and basically intimidating anyone of thinking of protesting or rising up.
I'm Carolyn Beeler. Today, the power dynamics in Gaza, also the legacy of a longtime opposition leader in Kenya.
The tens of millions of Kenyans today who can, go on Twitter and say, you know what, we don't agree with this policy decision. This is ridiculous. The fact that we can do that today, arguably, is a direct result of the reforms that he pushed for.
In Japan, making sake is a sacred ritual. Plus, she did a hike in record time, but she didn't miss the view.
I was hiking at night by full moon. It was just amazing.
All ahead on The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for joining us today. Marco Werman has the day off. We begin today's show in the Middle East as implementation of the new peace plan for Israel and Gaza unfolds. Tractor-trailer trucks loaded with fuel and humanitarian aid moved into the Rafah border crossing today. That's where the provisions so desperately needed in Gaza can enter from Egypt. Israeli authorities had been threatening to keep that border crossing closed, but according to Reuters, preparations were underway today to reopen it. Meanwhile, Hamas has taken steps to reassert control within the Gaza Strip. As The World's Matthew Bell reports, the Palestinian militant group has shown its willingness to employ harsh tactics.
On Monday evening, when Palestinians and Israelis were celebrating the ceasefire in Gaza, a video started making the rounds on social media. It was filmed in the street in Gaza City and verified by at least 2 news organizations. Armed men with their faces covered are standing over a group of guys kneeling in blindfolds with their hands tied behind their backs. 2 of the gunmen appear to be wearing green headbands worn by Hamas fighters. With a crowd of people watching, they suddenly opened fire, killing the 8 detainees. In a statement, Hamas later said the men executed were criminals and collaborators with Israel. On Tuesday, the Western-backed Palestinian Authority condemned the executions as heinous crimes. An independent Palestinian human rights group called them extrajudicial killings that cannot be justified under any circumstances. President Trump also mentioned the incident yesterday at the White House, referring to the Hamas gunmen in that video.
They did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you. That's okay.
Earlier this week, Trump was asked about Hamas reasserting its control in Gaza, and the president said that's something he agreed to in the ceasefire negotiations. Political scientist Mehaimer Abusada of Al-Azhar University in the Gaza Strip says this is exactly what Hamas is doing right now.
As long as this vacuum isn't filled by the so-called Palestinian technocratic committee that will run the daily life of the Palestinians, it means that Hamas will continue to run the daily life of the Palestinians. As President Trump said that the U.S. gave him a few days, but it seems to me the few days is going to be a few weeks.
Abusada spoke with me from Cairo, Egypt, where he's living now. He says it's impossible to know if the men shot and killed in that video were really gang members or working for Israel, but the intentions of Hamas are clear.
I think there was a message from those public executions that Hamas is still there. Hamas is strong and basically intimidating anyone of thinking of protesting or rising up against Hamas.
There are several armed groups in Gaza, some supported by Israel, that are rivals to Hamas. Abusada says he doesn't know how much support they have among ordinary Gazans, but he says there's plenty of ill will toward Hamas.
Palestinians in Gaza are very angry at Hamas. I mean, basically they do blame Hamas for provoking Israel into this destructive war against Gaza. And part of Hamas opponents basically ended up, working for these militias.
In one recent gun battle in Gaza City between Hamas and a rival group, several dozen people were killed, including 12 members of Hamas. That's according to the BBC. The peace plan brokered by the Trump White House calls on Hamas to give up its weapons. It also mentions the immediate deployment of an international stabilization force for Gaza, coordinated with Arab governments. Brian Katulis of the Middle East Institute in Washington says that's unlikely to happen anytime soon.
None of these countries will want to be seen as aiding and abetting what is some form of an Israeli occupation or coming in after a very brutal war. They don't want the political costs of that and the damage that it would do to their own credibility and legitimacy.
Katulis says there's an enormous deficit of trust between the countries that would need to work together to implement Trump's 20-point peace plan. Even the interim step of what a new governing authority in Gaza should look like is not spelled out in any detail. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
His Kenyan supporters called him Baba, the Swahili word for father. I'm talking about Raila Odinga, the revered Kenyan opposition leader who died this week at the age of 80. Odinga spent 9 years in prison and lost several presidential bids, but he helped multi-party democracy get its start in Kenya, and he also helped draft the country's constitution. Kenyan journalist Rama Nyang joined us from Nairobi to look back on Odinga's legacy. Rama, tell us about Raila Odinga's early years to start off with.
He was the son of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, so one of the main characters, if you will, one of the key players in Kenya's independence story. So he did come from a fairly strong political background. A dominant figure in Kenyan politics for the better part of 4 decades. And he was educated as an engineer in what was then East Germany, came back into the country and joined the civil service to work in the Bureau of Standards. And the decades thereafter, the 80s into the 90s, those are pretty rough years. That was a rough decade, not just for him, but his family.
So in the 1980s, Odinga opposed the one-party regime in Kenya. That's what landed him in prison so many times. But it is also what made him such an important figure in Kenya's pro-democracy movement. What was his basis for opposition to that regime, and how did he go about expressing that position?
At the time, there were quite a few political parties that were banned in the wake of Kenya becoming an independent state. And that sort of suppression of alternative voices and that consolidation of power around one party, KANU, the ruling party that essentially ran the Kenyan state all the way through to 2002, that suppression was what they were fighting against. And he was deeply opposed to that. Because if you took a position that was essentially in opposition to whatever the ruling party said, you were quote unquote an enemy of the state, you're an enemy of progress, and so on and so forth. And he wasn't the only one who was fighting against that sort of thing, but he was arguably one of the more prominent ones who emerged from that fight for multi-party democracy.
Tell me more about his prison time and the significance it had on his later career.
He spent quite a bit of time in detention all over the country. When he was released, I think around 1991, he said that, one of the hardest stints he had at that point in time was in the Manyani prison, which was a pretty formative factor for him, turning him into the politician that we eventually had. So when you speak to him and you see his speeches much later on, in the early 2000s, for example, when he's speaking about the need for respect for human rights, for people not to be abducted, for people to actually have a justice system that works, you could arguably say that a lot of his focus on having a public service, a state that actually works for the people, not for a narrow elite that defends the needs and wants of politicians. A lot of that was arguably informed by his stint in detention for the better part of a decade.
So you've illustrated a man who was a staunch supporter of multi-party democracy. I'm wondering what he actually did to make that multi-party democracy a reality in Kenya.
When he was released from detention in 1991, he realized that, look, if you're going to actually try and make a change, you have to have skin in the game as a political entity. And to do that, he got into the Forum for the Restoration of Democracy, or FORD. That, for him, was his vehicle to say, you know what, I do want change. I'm not just going to be sitting back and talking about it.
You mentioned he then went on to run for president. He did so 5 times. Did he ever come close to winning?
Very, very close in some cases. Looking back at 2007, it's widely believed that he did win that particular election. But the outcome of that election was extraordinarily disputed. The record keeping around it was incredibly terrible. And we, of course, also had an incredibly dark part of Kenyan history at that point in time with the post-election violence that left the better part of 1,000 Kenyans dead. So arguably, he's viewed as having won the 2007 election. He then went into the coalition government. And he ran again in 2013 and he tried again in 2022. 2022 was arguably one of the closest, not actually the closest, it's the closest run election that we've had. There's always this argument that his opponents used to make, you're always the bridesmaid but never the bride. But nonetheless, he had incredible amounts of influence on political party formation and public policy as well over the last 20 years.
I understand that he was also a savvy political operator, very focused on attaining power for himself and his party, even if that meant forming alliances with rivals. I've read commentary that was rather opportunistic. Others say it was just pragmatic. Is that approach an important part of his legacy?
It certainly is. There's always been that ruthlessly pragmatic deal-making side to him, and that inevitably, I think, for a lot of, for some Kenyans, especially the much younger demographic, that's not necessarily endeared him to them.
Speaking of the younger demographic, we have been hearing a lot about the pro-democracy demonstrations in Kenya just recently, the so-called Gen Z protests. I'm wondering if he had any role in those, mentorship or leadership or otherwise.
Not directly, no. Those protests were pretty much spontaneous. The difference between how a lot of the Gen Z protests, for lack of a better word, a lot of how the Gen Z protesters have essentially come into the streets is that it's, for the most part, and they say it themselves, if you look at conversations on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, they'll say, look, we are not engaging through political parties because we have been betrayed by those politicians, by those political parties. They do not speak for us. If anything, the policies they're making are making our lives a lot worse. So if you look at the protests in 2024, for example, the chat on social media was like, yo, Baba, sit this one out. We've got this. And you'd see the exact same narrative showing up again in 2025. So after the initial protest in 2024, William Ruto comes up and says, okay, fine. I've heard you. Initially, you called the protesters, quote unquote, treasonous criminals. He sort of walked that back, fired his entire cabinet. And as he saw it at the time, this was a political problem rather than a problem that was a result of the policies he was trying to pull through Parliament. And if it's a political problem, what do? Go and talk to some political party and see if you can buy yourself political cover. How does he do that? He goes to Raila Odinga and he says, look, I need a bit of political cover here. Why don't we have some of your members of Parliament join my cabinet in the name of, trying to restore a sense of national stability. Did that actually work? Well, jury's still out on that one. Economic performance is not exactly stellar. But ultimately, for a lot of young people, they say, hang on a minute, we went out there to protest, right, against these tax policies that are impoverishing us. And here you are backing your politicians, effectively riding to your personal gain on the backs of our sacrifices.
So the young protesters today asked Odinga to sit this one out, and they do not feel represented by him or the political establishment. Did he, though, influence in maybe less visible ways this new generation of activists?
You could say that, because the counter argument would be, we are in a position now, especially in Kenya, if you look at what's happening in our region, in East Africa, there's a significant strain of suppressing alternative viewpoints, suppressing dissent. We certainly see that in Tanzania. We see that as well in Uganda. And Kenya, in that sense, has always been sort of a bastion of free speech and very ruckus, very public disagreement of a policy direction. To the extent that we can do that today, that the tens of millions of Kenyans today who can, go on Twitter and say, we don't agree with this policy decision, this is ridiculous, and they actually directly text the president or members of parliament or cabinet ministers and say, no, this is not smart, this is wrong for reason X, Y, Z. The fact that we can do that today, arguably, is a direct result of the reforms that he pushed for and fought for in the 80s and the 90s.
That was journalist Rama Nyang in Nairobi, remembering Kenya's Raila Odinga, who died this week. Just ahead, a journey across an ocean with a dog. This is The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The number of Americans who applied for British citizenship in the first half of this year hit a record high. More than 4,000 people submitted applications. And when people make that move, their pets often go with them. Enter pet-centric charter travel. Jane Little is moving back to her native UK from the US and made the journey with her dog, Ronan. She reported this story along the way.
So we're in the waiting area in the lounge, and there's about 6 dogs so far. Some of them slightly more excitable than others. Hey, Ronan.
Sorry, guys. Excitement.
This is a first for me, flying out of Teterboro, New Jersey, with 8 humans, 10 dogs, and 1 cat called Graham. Poor Graham must travel in a crate, but the dogs sit alongside their humans aboard a Gulfstream G4. It's a pay-per-seat service organised by Adam Golder, the founder of K9 Jets.
So the majority of our customers are relocating from one country to another, whether it's from the US to the UK, to Dubai or Canada, and they're mainly relocating for work reasons.
And there's also quite a demand right now, isn't there? A lot of Americans and others leaving America and coming one way.
Yeah, I think, we've certainly, our phone hasn't stopped ringing since the election in America. So we've, pretty much all our flights from the US to UK and Europe are sold out.
Adam says the disruption to commercial travel from the COVID pandemic launched his pet charter business. He found social media groups with thousands of people looking to fly with their furry friends next to them. Since 2023, K9 Jets has flown over 5,000 pets up front, and its competitor Bark Air is packed as well. It costs an average of $9,000 one way from New Jersey to Europe, but Adam says most of his clients are not millionaires, just attached to their pets.
It's perfectly safe to fly in cargo, but people are so, I've got a deeper relationship, I think, with their pets than ever before. And they don't want to put them in cargo because they're family. Then you wouldn't want to put a baby in cargo. You want to sit next to your babies in the cabin of an aircraft, and hence the demand for our service, really.
Rooney, come say hi. We're going to be sitting together. Come say hi. So who's this? Who've we got here?
This is Hudson, and this is Sarah.
And this is?
Greg.
Hi, Greg.
He's 12 and she's 11.
And I'm getting a good lick from Sarah. Hi. Yes, Sarah. Oh, yeah, we're going to be good friends.
It's never going to end.
It's so cute. And have you ever flown this way before?
No, we haven't, and they've never been anywhere. So this is their first big trip, but my daughter is moving to the UK. She's a scientist, and she just got a position at the Institute of Cancer Research, which is under the Royal Marsden.
Oh, so you're delivering them?
I'm delivering them, yes. Yeah.
Greg Powell says his daughter had to leave America after the government cut research funding. He's a retiree from upstate New York and wouldn't fly the dogs in cargo due to the summer heat. And like the other passengers I met, he seemed, normal, not part of the super wealthy private jet set. Neither, by the way, am I. But I am very attached to my 4-year-old golden doodle, Ronan, who's the calmest dog in the world, if she's not put in a crate. Others went to even greater lengths and expense to get here.
My name is Gloria Haynes.
And you're here with?
Piper.
And tell me, you weren't supposed to be on this plane, were you?
We weren't supposed to be on this plane. We were supposed to be on the Queen Mary that sailed last Saturday. And so we went through the process of applying for a pet health certificate. And our vet, I think, may have had some bumps along the way. And we ended up applying for another one. And it did not come until the day after we were set to sail. And
oh, that must have been so stressful.
It was so stressful and so heartbreaking. And so
Gloria's husband set sail, and she and her dachshund Piper waited in New York for the paperwork and a flight. Almost all of us had a stressful wait for the US government to endorse the health paperwork because of the tight timeline and low staffing and the sheer volume. My vet said she's signed 3 to 4 times as many travel certificates this year. Gloria couldn't rebook on the Queen Mary for 2 years, and since only service dogs can fly across the Atlantic in the cabin, she wouldn't put Piper on a regular flight.
You will board first. Gregory, you will follow her. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great flight. All right.
Can I take one of them?
Would you like me to call her?
She.
Yes.
We like to misguide people, misdirect them by calling her Ronan, which sounds like an Irish boy's name, but it's Ronan, Japanese samurai with no master. Isn't it, Ronan?
Hi, cutie. I love puppies.
This is Gina, who's going to be looking after you, Ronan.
Hi, Rona. You're very cute. Can I see this face? Ooh, you look like a little lamb. Are you really a dog? I don't believe it.
Gina Cope, who proves to be a dog whisperer, has flown pets across the Atlantic 3 times in 4 days. Would she do it by choice?
Absolutely. Babies and dogs are my favorite. Much easier than the adults.
They tend to be fairly well behaved, do they, on these trips?
Yeah, for the most part. Everybody has a great personality in their own living room, and then this is very stressful for them.
So this is definitely luxury. All the dogs have a seat each. The only downside of that for us is that Ronan doesn't like to climb on furniture. And for a normally very calm dog, she's been very anxious and panting. The roar of the engine's a little troubling as well, but she's finally, about 5 minutes into flight when we're well over New Jersey, she's settling down. We're looking out of the little oval windows down at the tiny lights below. Gina brought drinks and sandwiches, nothing for the dogs who were on fasting for 6 hours ahead of the night flight, and everyone slumbered. She said it was the calmest group she's flown, and better than the last one.
I didn't have a very good experience on the last one.
Oh dear, what happened?
I had a little bite. Not through the skin, thankfully, and not through a hole in the pants, but as I walked by, the dog nipped my leg. They get a little testy, just like us.
We had a smooth and quick flight, 2 dogs cuddled up on the sofa, mine asleep on the floor at Greg's feet. Welcome to England,
Yeah.
furry friends.
I hope our paperwork's okay.
Don't say that, Greg.
What can they do at this point?
Send us back. In cargo. And just like that, it's over. We arrive at London Luton, where officials check our pet certificates, and Ronan gets a doggy bag with a cookie and a soft toy bone. We'll need to save up if we ever want to fly back, but even then we may not get a seat, since there's growing demand. K9 Jets is booked for months and says it's to expand its routes next year. For The World, I'm Jane Little.
Ronan, Hudson, Sarah, great dog names, and they're pretty cute too. Check out pictures of the K9 jet flight at theworld.org. Just ahead, fighting for women's rights in Iran from outside of the country. You are listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. When Tehran erupted in protests for women's rights 3 years ago, one key player was a dissident who wasn't even in Iran. Mashed Nazemi started pushing for women's rights in her home country long before the struggle grabbed international headlines, long before she had to flee Iran. And she is still part of the fight. Reporter Fariba Nawa brings us her story.
This is Mashed Nazemi, an Iranian women's rights activist. I first met her in southwest Turkey in the fall of 2023. That day, we sat in her rented apartment in Isparta as she sang a ballad from an Iranian pop song. The lyrics say, "My dear, don't worry, life is with us. If we lose these days, there's still tomorrow." The song gives Nazmi hope when she's at her lowest. The 37-year-old has chin-length curly hair and a warm smile. She's survived a lot: imprisonment, sexual harassment, death threats, and a deportation camp. She's been a dogged activist on behalf of women in her native Iran, where women don't have equal rights, and the situation has been likened to gender apartheid. Women can't sing in public. Their supreme leader has said riding a bike is shameful. Their testimony is considered half of a man's in court. Their right to inheritance is less than men. I started following Nazmi's story during the Women Life Freedom Movement in fall 2022. Protests erupted in Iran and in the diaspora after Mahsa Jina Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, was arrested on charges of breaking the modest dress code. She was then beaten to death while in custody of the Iranian regime. At that time, Nazmi was in Turkey, which has become an opposition haven for Iranian dissidents. She was speaking out about political prisoners and crackdowns on protesters, while also helping dissidents in Turkey get legal aid and financial support. Nazmi wasn't doing that work alone. Nazmi's oldest sister, Puran Nazmi, was at the forefront of the movement in Tehran. The renowned human rights defender has been in and out of Iranian prisons throughout her life. Nazmi says it was Puran's sacrifices that encouraged her to become an activist, too. Nazmi plays a video her sister Puran made for her while on the run in Iran. In the video, Puran is sitting in a forest by a waterfall. "Our hearts are so linked. I'm so appreciative and grateful for all that you've done," Puran says. The sisters participated in previous uprisings in Iran, demanding democratic rights for women and minorities. They were both arrested in 2016, but Nazmi was released. Her family told her to flee, so Nazmi came to neighboring Turkey and applied for asylum to a third country. When Puran was also released from jail, she remained in Iran. But the sisters worked as a team online across the border. They talked to the opposition media, like Voice of America Farsi, making a case for regime change. So when the protests started in 2022, the sisters had a wide network of support in the Iranian opposition. What they wanted was a revolution. Instead, the hardline clerical government arrested 22,000 protesters, including Puran. The government also killed 500 people inside Iran, calling them traitors and agitators. Then the regime came for those in the diaspora. Michael Michelson studies Iran and transnational repression. He's with the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto.
Iran continues to target women human rights defenders abroad, and among the typical and easy-to-use methods are digital threats, such as phishing and hacking attempts, smear and defamation campaigns, as well as threats against family members inside Iran, which is a very widespread method by the Iranian regime.
Those tactics were certainly used against Nazmi. When we met in Isparta in 2023, a year after those events, Nazmi and I walked to a cafe. Nazmi drank tea and chain-smoked as she recounted what had happened. In November 2022, Nazmi went to her corner grocery store on a rainy winter night when she noticed two cars turn on their lights. They followed her. One of the cars stopped, and a man with a beard and pot belly got out. He cursed her in her native Farsi and then said,
"چی؟ دهنتو میبندی یا توی چمدون باید بفرستیمت ایران؟ خواهرت که ادامیه. خودت هم میخوای با چمدون بری ایران؟
Shut your mouth or we'll send you to Iran in a suitcase. Your sister's on death row. You want to go to Iran in a suitcase?" Nazmi says she couldn't move for a few seconds, but eventually yelled for help and ran. She reported the incident to the Turkish police. They didn't believe her until they found CCTV footage of the incident. A few days later, a Turkish immigration agent called and asked her to come to their office. She thought she might be getting asylum to a third country, somewhere safer than Turkey. But instead, the agent accused her of making a fake ID card, which Nazmi denied. It's a scene she remembers vividly.
I
didn't make a fake card. I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. If you want to deport me, do so. Nazmi was detained and moved into a deportation camp. She says the Iranian regime must have informants in Turkish immigration offices. Otherwise, how would she have ended up in a deportation camp right after reporting what happened when those cars followed her on the street? And my reporting bears that out. The Turkish government has arrested people in its own government for kidnappings and murders of Iranian dissidents in the last several years. In the camp, Nazmi says guards beat her, pulling out half of her hair. Another Iranian migrant accused her of being transgender and threw soup in her face. Nazmi says she had to disrobe in front of the other detainees to prove she was a biological woman to prevent more abuse. She says the camp almost broke her. She had meds with her, and she took a lot of pills at once. Nazmi says, I didn't take them to die, actually, but to prove something. How badly they treated us that it got me to this point. Nazmi was hospitalized outside the camp. Doctors pumped her stomach, and she recovered. Police released her, and she returned to Sparta and appealed the deportation. Turkey denied it again, but Nazmi's story was out in the Western press. We told the story of her detainment on The World, along with press she received in the French newspaper Le Monde. That attention helped her get a visa to France after 8 years in the purgatory of the Turkish asylum system. She resettled in a French village in December 2023 and continued her activism. Nazmi has expanded her cause to advocate for Afghan migrants as well. Salam Mahshid Jan.
Salam Fariboy Azizam.
How are you?
I
visited Nazmi in the spring in Paris. She met me at Republic Square, upbeat and charged. Nazmi wore a t-shirt with Woman Life Freedom written in French inside the map of Iran. She still chain smokes and can speak some French. She takes me on a train to her favorite spots in the city. The ritzy Iranian neighborhood, a Farsi bookstore, the historic communist cemetery where a famous Persian writer is buried. Nazmi has met diplomats and leaders in the opposition in person. She works with international human rights organizations to research and help political dissidents get visas. Regime change in Iran is a distant goal now. And life is easier in France. But Nazmi still looks over her shoulder when she walks down the street. She still gets death threats on social media. Many of the senders say they are the soldiers of the Islamic Republic. The DMs threaten her with execution, drowning, rape. Nazmi's under French police protection. She reports all of it. As for her sister, she's been released from Evin prison, and she's awaiting trial. 3 years after the Woman Life Freedom Uprising, Nazmi says, the most important thing to come out of this movement was that it showed how influential women can be inside Iran. It became an example. People learned the power of civil disobedience, and it gave them confidence and courage. Many women don't wear a headscarf in public anymore in Iran. Some are riding bikes and singing on the metro trains. The regime can still punish them under the law, but often looks the other way. Nazmi says that's a small win, but she'll persist with her sister for the bigger win of democratic freedom. For The World, I'm Fariba Nawa, Istanbul.
The World produced an award-winning podcast last year with Fariba Nawa and Chris Harland Dunaway about Iranian dissidents who are persecuted even outside of Iran. That program, Lethal Descent, is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Check it out. Two news updates now on stories we've been covering this week. In Madagascar, the leader of a military coup will become the new president. Colonel Michael Randrianirina led a rebellion ousting the deeply unpopular André Rajoelina yesterday. He had been the target of escalating protests over several weeks. Colonel Randrianirina says he will take the oath of office in the coming days. He was cheered on by demonstrators who said the military was listening to the people. And on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, there is a ceasefire today, though key border crossings do remain closed. Dozens of people have been killed in recent clashes there. Regional powers appealed to both sides to calm the tensions out of concerns that more fighting would destabilize the region. Explore both of these stories in depth at theworld.org. We go now to Japan for a story about sake. Traditionally, the drink is made from rice, water, yeast, and koji, a kind of helpful mold. Turning those simple ingredients into alcohol is part art, part science. Reporter Hannah Kirshner visited the Terada Hankei brewery north of Tokyo, where the fermentation process is treated with special reverence.
In a large wooden warehouse filled with vats of sake, brewers sing as they work. The head brewer is Masaru Terada. He married into the Terada family and became the 24th generation owner. Terada Honke makes natural sake. That means they use wild yeast that comes from the air in the brewery. And they even have their own strain of koji. The mold produces enzymes key to sake fermentation. The rice they use comes from nearby fields, and the brewers even grow some of it themselves. This area is surrounded by so many rice paddies. A long time ago, this region was under the sea, Terada says. The rice paddies are flat, but there are small hills dotted here and there, he says. One of those little hills sticks up right behind the brewery, like a tiny mountain. At the top is Kozaki Shrine, a Shinto shrine that has existed for over 1,000 years, according to Terada. The well water that he uses to brew sake comes from under this shrine. Thanks to the shrine, the forest around it is protected. And because of that forest, the water source is still pristine, Terada says. I follow a brewery worker named Kodai Mitsuhashi up the path to the shrine. He explains that the oldest trees here are cherished as gods or spirits. With these big trees, the roots spread down deeper and deeper, Mitsuhashi says. The roots help filter the rainwater that eventually accumulates underneath this hill. Thanks to the trees, delicious water keeps flowing, he says. That well water flows into the brewery, where it's used to steam rice and mix into the fermentation mash. Inside the brewery, I climb a ladder to a high platform above the brewing tanks. Mayumi Nakamura is tending to the fermentation mash, called the moromi. She leans over one of the tanks, stirring with a long pole. The moromi inside looks like thin, milky porridge, bubbling gently from fermentation. At first it had a really sweet fragrance, but now it's starting to smell like alcohol, she says. There are notes of rice bran and a distinct tartness. It's becoming sake. Nakamura says her job is to make a good environment for microorganisms to thrive. She thinks of them as invisible collaborators. It's not like we're controlling the microorganisms. More like they're working the way that they want to work. And we're moved by them, Nakamura says. Songs like this used to be a normal part of brewery work in Japan, but now they're rare. The songs have a practical purpose. They keep the brewers synchronized as they each mash a tub of steamed rice. The softened rice will spontaneously ferment into a natural yeast starter for the sake. Working to the same rhythm helps make sure every tub is consistent. But the boss, Masaru Terada, says there's more to it than that.
楽しい気持ちになって、それが菌にも響くんじゃないかなと、菌とのコミュニケーションにもなるんじゃないかな。
It makes us feel happy, and that happiness might resonate with the microbes as well. It's a form of communication with the yeast, Terada says. Some breweries feel more like laboratories or factories, but Terada sees his differently. They don't wear white lab coats or masks.
もう極端に言ったらドアもないですし、蔵を。
There aren't even doors, says Terada. The air from outside blows right through.
まあ本当に極端に言ったら森のような環境。森の中っていうのもいろんな菌がいて。
Actually, it's like being in a forest, where there are all kinds of microorganisms and living things. And I think a large ecosystem has formed here, Terada says. The brewers work with forces seen and unseen. Water from beneath the shrine, rice from the surrounding fields, and microorganisms that transform these materials into sake. For The World, I'm Hannah Kirshner, Chiba, Japan.
Hannah's story is part of a series here at The World exploring sacred places across the globe. You can check out all of that reporting at theworld.org/sacrednation. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The famous Pacific Crest Trail stretches all the way from Canada to Mexico, more than 2,600 miles traversing the mountainous West Coast. Hiking the trail end to end usually takes 4 to 6 months. Well, Julie Brock just did it in just under 70 days. Partly running it, partly walking it. Julie is an Australian runner, and her time will likely be a new women's record for a supported hike. We spoke this morning.
So I've hiked the Appalachian Trail and the Continental Divide Trail, so I have through hiked both of those. And obviously I needed to do the Pacific Crest Trail to get the Triple Crown.
Obviously.
Yes.
And the Triple Crown is just the accomplishment of having done all three of those huge hikes
correct.
In the U.S.
So, yeah, and just thought I'd see how fast I could do it. Who knows? Who knows what the human body's capable of?
Why not? We mentioned this usually takes months to through hike, meaning walking from the beginning to the end, carrying all of your gear along the way. You had a different approach. Explain how you covered this distance so fast.
So I only carried what I needed between when I could meet up with my partner. But in some of those cases, some points were quite a distance apart. So I think the longest stretch I did was 100 miles. That I had to carry all my gear because I couldn't stop and see my partner in that time.
So you get a resupply from your partner and you set back out on the next segment. What are you carrying as you head back out?
It was just basically carrying food, water. Usually always carried like a rain jacket, a thermal, and a headlight, or 2 headlights actually I always carried, just in case one doesn't work. You've got a backup. So yeah, I carried a bit of stuff. The 100-mile section, I think I carried a bit more stuff just in case something happened during the night and I had to stop.
And you slept in the RV or van that he was driving
every night,
right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
does that mean
right. So
does that mean you went up to 100 miles without sleeping?
Yes.
So 100 miles of hiking, no sleeping, took about 2 full days, about 48 hours?
I think the longest one, was about 48 hours.
Wow.
And I just kept going until I met up with him.
What were the biggest challenges on this particular hike?
Well, I hiked it all solo. The other hikes I've done, I've always hiked with somebody else. So you've always got company. You can always bounce, ideas off. This was completely solo. Some of it I had to do at nighttime. My eyesight's not real good at night, so I had a lot of problems there. But it's just, all overcoming those, challenges that make it part of the journey.
You mentioned your eyesight. I understand you're blind in one eye and nearsighted in the other. How did that impact your wayfinding at night? Because you would sometimes be hiking and running for about 2 days straight between resupply trips down to meet your partner.
Right. So, I have depth perception is totally different. So I'd quite often fall over, trip on things that I didn't see, and you just don't have the professional vision that someone with two eyes has. You're only looking out of one, so you can only sort of see this much. So, it's a challenge, but it's, I guess, a challenge that I'm used to. You just have to deal with it and move forward.
What about any moments of awe that you might have had out on the trail? I think that's one part of being outdoors that many of us can identify with, even if we haven't hiked as far as you.
Just the scenery every day was just, I'd often stop and just take it all in, and it was just magic, The views were just spectacular, and then even, some of the nighttime sections, people think, oh, you can't see anything at night. I was hiking at night by full moon, and it was just amazing, to see the full moon. And then there was one particular spot, I was on a ridge, and you looked out and you could see all the lights of LA, but the full moon sitting above it, and it was just beautiful. Yeah, it was incredible.
The perhaps opposite of a moment of awe, you were near wildfires a couple of times, right?
I was, but I was very lucky, as in I knew they were around, but I knew they weren't close enough to the PCT to affect me. So I kept going. There was one part, Castle Crag. I went through there in the morning, and then that afternoon I'd climbed another mountain, and I turned back around to look at where I'd come from, and there was a fire there at Castle Crags. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, I was just there a few hours ago.
Oh, wow.
And, and then when I met up with Dave, my partner, he'd said they'd actually closed the trail there now. So I'd only got through within hours. I guess that was the closest I came to a fire. But, the trail had closed days after I'd gone through a couple of other places as well.
Wow.
For fires.
Fire kind of following you at your back a bit.
Yeah. And you could see the helicopters going above and picking up water out of lakes and going over and dumping it. But, I never felt threatened by a fire at any point.
What did it feel like the moment you reached the end of the trail and were done at last?
It was sort of, wow, I did that. I can't believe I've actually achieved that. I've gone that whole way in this time, and I still find it hard to believe. Even now, I don't think it's fully sunk in.
Julie Brock is a runner from Australia. Last week, she completed the Pacific Crest Trail in 69 days, 19 hours, and 27 minutes, setting what is expected to be a new women's speed record for a southbound supported hike. Every year, the Nigerian town of Igbo-Ora hosts the annual World Twins Festival. If you weren't there, Taiwo Ojewale wants to know why not. He is a local who spoke to Reuters.
I'll be quite honest, it's a bit disappointing that the event is not as global as it should be.
Last week, the town about 50 miles outside of Lagos took on a Mardi Gras vibe as pairs of twins, many dressed in matching outfits, showed up by the thousands. It is not a coincidence that this festival takes place in Igbo-Ora.
They have the highest rate of twins than any other where on earth.
Worldwide, there's an average of 12 sets of twins for every 1,000 births. This part of Nigeria has about 50 sets of twins per 1,000 births, according to a study from the 1980s. Researchers have not figured out why. Some residents say the secret lies in the local diet. Others suspect a genetic cause. Either way, twins are considered a blessing in Igbo-Ora, which is why the town goes all out on celebrating them. The festival organizers, themselves twins, hope to win a world record for largest gathering of twins on Earth. World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Come hang out with me again tomorrow.
The World is supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. luminafoundation.org. By the Ford Foundation. By the Henry Luce Foundation. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Jake Shapiro and Elizabeth Hansen, Jamel and Tom Perkins, John and Jill Gilbert, Lynn Brody, and Stephanie Gardner. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.